All right, so next up, we're going to have Rudo Kemper from the Amazon Conservation Team, who's going to talk about mapping Indigenous oral history.
Hi everybody, this is a little short for me, so I'm going to disembody this from its stand, and also so I don't feel like I'm doing stand-up comedy. That's okay, I'm going to stand over here. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about some of the work that my organization has been doing on mapping Indigenous oral districts in the Amazon rainforest and a new open source app that we're developing to do that work. I'd like to start with this really kind of beautiful map that was produced before the time of modern day GIS. This was created by an indigenous person, a Taino person called Wuta Wajimnu in 1989. And this is an area of about 1.5 million hectares in the southwest of Suriname. So the reason why Wuta decided to make this map, he himself didn't need it. You know, his community has always kind of known where these places are, which have passed down through oral histories. But around that time, a lot more outsiders started to come to this territory. And so they needed a communication device in order to show extractive industries and the government what their landscape looked like, and because also they were concerned that as the new technologies were entering into the communities, that some of the younger people would not have the ability to retain the knowledge in the ways that their elders did. So Wuta decided to make this map in 1989, and one of the first things that my organization, Amazon Conservation Team, did when it was founded in 1996 was to turn that into you can call it a GIS map, a digital map, in order to geo-reference some of this data and to turn it into a tool that can be used for better communication with outsiders. So this was relatively pioneering at the time. This was done with Max Chapin, who's actually one of the pioneers of the field of Indigenous mapping. His organization's Center for Native Lands. It was presented in the village in 2001, and it's actually still something that's being used today in negotiations with the government. I was in Suriname a few weeks ago in a meeting with the government where this map was still being presented in negotiations for land rights. So a very kind of powerful tool that the communities can use to actualize change in their lands. Something very interesting though about these maps, I mean, they're fascinating to look at, right? You've got so much information that's embedded on here. You've got places that are of historical significance. You've got sacred sites. You've got local place names indicating natural resources. But it's a little bit hard looking at this map. This is actually not in Suriname, but in Brazil on the other side of the border, what the places mean or what kind of stories are attached to them. So for example, on this map, one of the most important sites of the Taino people is actually located right there. And it's a granite mountain which to this community is the origin of the universe. It's located at the exact center of their territory, and it's highly significant. So at the time, ACT published a little book about it in order to capture some of that oral history. And that was the best that could be done at the time with the technologies that were available. Since then, ACT has done a lot of mapping work across the Amazon rainforest, in Colombia as well as in Brazil, and more of Suriname, so Taino is located right there. And flash forward 15 years, I started with the organization in 2014 working with the Makawai, located in the center of Suriname. They're actually an Afro-descendant community, so they were brought over as slaves to Suriname, escaped into the rainforest over 300 years ago, and still reside there today. So it's also considered to be an ancestral and traditional occupation of the land. So in 2015, I started to work with this community to do indigenous mapping work, or Afro-descendant mapping work. And so we took one of these old maps to indicate how the work used to be done, and then using more GIS and GPS technologies, and also doing paper mapping, we produced large-scale maps of their lands with the same kind of way that used to be done, but with more modern technologies. But one of the things that we discovered in this process, just like 20 years ago, my team at the time discovered there was a lot of storytelling that was embedded to the places as well. So as soon as you start to do this mapping work, and for example, being on the rivers with the elders, the stories start to flow out, right, about what is the significance of this place, why is it called that, what took place there. And so we kind of realized that we needed to do something more to preserve some of the storytelling traditions. So you could produce maps like this. This is an ancestral map of this community, which has over 700 place names, and you could put some of the stories on the map as we did, but we decided to go a little bit further and to actually go and video record some of the elders sharing those stories. So that was a project that we started in 2017, working with all of the communities of the Makawai, and we ended up recording over 300 oral histories for 150 important places. So then the next question that we had was, okay, we have all of this great data, how do we tie it to the maps? Well, as everybody in this room knows, you have these interactive mapping technologies that you could use nowadays. So you have, story maps, for example, that's produced by Esri. You have something like Native Lands, shameless plug, I'm on the board of this organization. It's a website that shows you where, what indigenous communities land you currently reside on. You can search by your address and it'll actually tell you. These are great resources, but the issue for us working in the Amazon is that they're all dependent on internet access. And we work in extremely remote conditions where either there is no internet access, it's not likely to be there for at least 10 years, or it's very expensive. So we decided to do something a little bit experimental, and that was to make our own open source app. We decided to make it open source so that anybody could use it. As I said, it needed to be offline compatible. It needed to have custom-based maps, because something like OpenStreetMap is great, but if you zoom in on the Trio landscape in the Amazon, you see absolutely nothing. Or you see colonial placements, for example. So we decided to have it so that you can make your own base maps. And the other important thing about it is to have a permissions mechanism where when somebody looks at the application as an anonymous user, you only see the stories that the communities want to share. Whereas when you log in, you can see more content. So with that said, we came in touch with a company, Mapbox. Is anybody here from Mapbox? By any chance? No Mapboxers? Okay. That's okay. They're a great company. They're one of the most open source APIs of any kind of mapping, online mapping platform out there. And we got in touch with a network of open source developers called Ruby for Good. And we made an application. Okay, we have a Ruby for Gooder here? Yes! Excellent, thank you so much. And we made this application that we call Terrastories. So the way Terrastories works, this is an animated GIF, is you enter the site and from there, maybe this doesn't work onto animated GIFs. Or you have to press play or something like that. Uh-oh.
I think it does.
Yes?
Okay, Dan.
Okay. We got tech support here. Okay, there you go. All right. Yes.
Dan!
So it's an interactive map with the same kind of data that I showed earlier. And then on the side here, you have a sidebar with all of the different stories that are attached, points on the places on the map. You can either click on points and view the stories that are associated with it. It's hard to see here, but there's also filters. So you can filter by the speaker, the type of place. You can have indigenous taxonomies put into place there in order to filter the map content and the stories. And there's also, as you saw, a login mechanism where you can log in and see restricted content, add more content, edit, and so on and so forth. There's also a translator, so you can translate it into any indigenous language that you want. So this is the application Terrastories. As you can see, they're anonymous versus user only, so those are the stories and points that are restricted. And it works entirely offline. It works on mobile devices. We have it currently set up that it's a kind of like a portable OpenStreetMap project. It's a similar kind of mechanism where it transmits a Wi-Fi beam, and then you can get in touch with a mobile device or anything else in order to load the resource. It's designed to be very fun and interactive so that the youth are learning from the application. That's one of the main purposes, the transmission of traditional knowledge. So the kids love it, it's fun to play with. And we've done this work now with several different communities across the Amazon. And we're continuing to develop it. There's the URL, terrastories.io. If anybody's interested, we have a demo. We are definitely looking for open source contributions. If anybody is interested in making a contribution to this project, please come talk to me. We have a methodology guide as well on how to do this kind of work with communities. And just a few points, it's good for Indigenous language. It's the International Year of Indigenous Languages, so we've definitely worked that in there as well. For mapping place names, geographic context, fun to play with. And we're looking for volunteers. And we are hosting a hackathon in Berlin if anybody wants to go travel all the way out there in January 2020. So with that, and just very briefly, why is a conservation organization involved in doing this kind of work? Well, there's a lot of research that's coming out which is showing actually the link between storytelling and conservation, that it actually is something that encourages people to preserve their environment if they know the stories behind the places. So there's research coming out about that too. So with that, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.
Thanks. That was excellent.